HOA tried to force me to join after 10 years. The judge laughed them out of court. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, we would like to ask you for one small favor. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you will not miss any of our latest videos. It only takes a moment, costs nothing, and is one of the best ways to help us continue creating powerful, emotional, and dramatic stories like this one. Your support means more to us than you can imagine. Also, let us know where you are watching from today. Share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Now, let us return to our main character. Touch that truck, and you'll be explaining to a judge why you tried to steal it. The tow operator froze with one hand wrapped around the steel hook. It was 6:12 on a Monday morning. Cold mist clung to the pines along my driveway, and the diesel engine of his flatbed rattled hard enough to shake dew from the mailbox. Amber lights flashed across the cedar siding of my house. The hydraulic pump whined. Hot exhaust mixed with the smell of wet gravel and fresh coffee drifting through my open front door. Behind him stood Vanessa Whitmore. White coat, polished boots, blonde hair locked into place like even the wind needed written permission to touch it. She held a red folder against her chest and smiled. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "this unpleasantness could have been avoided if you had simply paid what you owe." I looked at the tow cable lying beneath my Ford F-250. Then I looked at the paper taped to my windshield. Pine Ridge Estates HOA. Delinquent assessment. Amount due, $18,460. 10 years of membership fees, late penalties, legal costs, community improvement assessments. There was only one problem. I had never joined Pine Ridge Estates. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 46 years old, and I build custom cabinets for people who spend more on kitchens than my father spent building our entire house. I've lived on that property since I was 16. The cedar beams above the porch were cut by my father's hands. The stone chimney came from rock we hauled out of the creek together one summer, back when the land beyond our fence was nothing but pasture and pine. Pine Ridge Estates didn't exist then. No stone entrance, no matching mailboxes, no clubhouse with fake columns. Just our house, 12 acres, and a gravel road my father maintained with an old tractor that coughed blue smoke every winter. The subdivision arrived later, then the HOA. For 10 years, they left me alone, until Vanessa Whitmore became president. She stepped closer and opened the red folder, letting the papers snap in the cold air. "The community boundary was updated," she said. "Your property is now recognized as part of Pine Ridge Estates." I almost laughed. "You updated a boundary onto land you don't own?" Her smile tightened. "All properties benefiting from our roads, security patrols, and neighborhood standards are required to contribute. My road is private." "That's your interpretation." The tow operator shifted his weight. He was a broad man with tired eyes and grease worked deep into the cracks of his gloves. He looked from Vanessa to me, then down at the truck registration in my hand. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this order says HOA repossession." "Correct." "That's not a thing," I said. Vanessa ignored me. She pointed toward my truck like she was ordering furniture removed from a hotel lobby. "Proceed." The operator didn't move. Somewhere beyond the trees, a sprinkler clicked on. Water hissed across a perfect HOA lawn while the three of us stood in the fog, listening to that engine idle. I walked to the edge of my driveway and pulled Vanessa's notice from beneath the windshield wiper. The paper was thick, expensive. At the bottom, beneath the threats of liens and foreclosure, was a line that made the back of my neck go cold. Mandatory membership effective retroactively. Retroactively. They weren't just trying to force me into the HOA. They were claiming I had belonged to them for 10 years without knowing it. Vanessa leaned close enough for me to smell citrus perfume over the diesel fumes. "You can fight this," she whispered. "But by the time you're finished, the legal fees will cost more than the property." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about dues. She wanted my land. More specifically, she wanted the private road running across its eastern edge, the only route wide enough for Pine Ridge Estates to begin the luxury expansion they had announced 2 weeks earlier. I folded the notice once and slid it into my jacket. Then I smiled. Vanessa mistook that smile for surrender. What she didn't know was that my father had left behind more than a house. And somewhere inside his rusted toolbox was a document that would make a judge laugh her entire HOA out of court. Where are you watching from? And what would you do if an HOA tried to claim 10 years of your life with one piece of paper? After the tow truck left, the silence felt louder than the diesel engine had. I stood beside my Ford with Vanessa's notice in my hand, watching her white SUV disappear through the fog. The paper crackled between my fingers, stiff and cold, like it had been printed to feel official. Inside, the coffee on my kitchen counter had gone bitter. The house creaked as the furnace kicked on, and for a second I could hear my father's boots crossing the old pine floor. He had built every room slowly, paycheck by paycheck, refusing shortcuts even when money ran completely out. He used to say a deed mattered because memory could be challenged, but ink had witnesses. I never understood why he kept copies of everything. Surveys, tax receipts, easement maps, even letters from county offices that no longer existed. That morning, his caution stopped looking old-fashioned and started looking prophetic instead. I went to the garage and pulled down the gray metal toolbox from the shelf above his workbench. Dust rolled off the lid. The hinges groaned. Inside were socket wrenches wrapped in oily cloth, a cracked tape measure, and the cedar smell of sawdust trapped for years underneath the tray. Beneath the removable tray, I found a brown envelope sealed with brittle tape. My name was written across the front in his blocky handwriting. Ethan Property Records. The sight of it tightened something behind my ribs. He had labeled it for me before cancer made holding a pen difficult for him. I carried the envelope to the dining table and opened it carefully. The first document was the original 1978 deed. The second was a county plat showing my 12 acres outlined in red, completely outside the future subdivision boundary. The third was stranger, a signed exemption agreement from 2014 in black. I remembered that year. Pine Ridge's developer had visited my father 3 times, offering cash if he joined the association and granted access across our eastern road. Dad refused every offer. Eventually, the developer signed a permanent waiver confirming our property would remain independent, with no dues, covenants, or assessments. The signature at the bottom belonged to Arthur Bell, Pine Ridge's founder. Beside it sat the embossed county seal and a recording number. I ran my thumb across the raised stamp. Vanessa had not inherited an unclear boundary dispute. She had inherited a written promise, filed and designed to survive. Then I found the map Vanessa had attached to her demand. Her version moved the HOA boundary nearly 400 feet west, wrapping around my house and swallowing the private road. The line was thick, bright blue, and freshly printed, but no county approval number appeared anywhere on the page. That was when the anger settled into something colder. I photographed every page, locked the originals in my gun safe, and called Rachel Bennett, a property attorney my father had trusted. When she answered, I told her the HOA was trying to rewrite 10 years of history. She paused, then said, "Send me everything. Tonight." Vanessa Whitmore did not wait for my attorney to respond. By Wednesday morning, 3 orange stakes had appeared along my eastern property line. Their plastic flags snapped in the wind, bright against the wet grass. One stood beside the oak tree where my father had carved our initials. Another had been hammered directly through the gravel shoulder of my private road. I pulled the nearest stake from the ground. A black SUV stopped behind me before I reached the house. Vanessa stepped out wearing dark sunglasses and carrying a clipboard. 2 HOA board members followed her. Gerald Pike, a retired insurance manager who avoided eye contact, and Linda Mercer, the neighborhood treasurer, whose nervous smile looked stapled onto her face. "You are removing association survey markers," Vanessa said. "They're on my land." Our engineer confirmed otherwise. "Which engineer?" She tapped the clipboard. "That information is confidential." The wind carried the smell of damp leaves and her sharp citrus perfume across the road. Somewhere inside the SUV, a turn signal kept clicking. Nobody had turned it off. Vanessa pointed toward the eastern fence. This corridor will become the secondary entrance for Pine Ridge Phase 4. Construction begins next month. Cooperation would make the transition easier for everyone. There it was. Not community standards. Not shared responsibility. A road. My road. The same strip of crushed limestone my father and I had spent 3 summers grading by hand. The same road Vanessa now described as a corridor, as if changing the noun changed the owner. You planned the expansion before sending me the membership notice, I said. Her mouth curved slightly. The board plans years ahead. And you need my property to make it work. We need members to respect lawful decisions. I looked at Gerald. His cheeks had gone pale. Did you vote to move the boundary? He opened his mouth, but Vanessa answered for him. The vote was unanimous. Linda stared at the ground. That told me enough. Vanessa handed me another envelope. This one contained a cease and desist order, a $500 fine for removing HOA property, and notice of an emergency board hearing scheduled for Friday. At the bottom, bold letters warned that continued interference could lead to legal action and forced access. Forced access. I could almost hear Rachel's voice telling me not to react. So I folded the papers and slipped them under my arm. Vanessa mistook my silence again. You have lived beside Pine Ridge for 10 years, she said. You benefited from our property values, our patrols, and our improvements. It is time you paid your share. My father rejected membership. Your father is no longer the owner. The sentence landed harder than I expected. For 1 second, all I heard was that forgotten turn signal clicking inside her SUV. Then I stepped closer. No, I said. But his deed is still alive. Her smile disappeared. That afternoon, Rachel called after reviewing the documents. She said the exemption was valid. The altered map carried no legal authority, and the retroactive fees were absurd. Then her voice lowered. Ethan, they filed something with the county yesterday. What? A claim stating your road has served the public continuously for 10 years. I looked through the kitchen window at the orange stakes trembling beside my fence. Vanessa was not merely trying to make me join her HOA. She was building a paper trail to steal my road. The emergency board hearing started at 7 on Friday night, but Vanessa had already filled every chair before I arrived. The clubhouse smelled of burnt coffee, lemon cleaner, and wet wool. Rain tapped against the tall windows while 40 residents sat facing a folding table draped in a blue Pine Ridge banner. Vanessa occupied the center seat beneath the association seal, flanked by Gerald and Linda like a suburban judge with her own frightened jury. A projector displayed an aerial photograph of my property. Someone had drawn a blue line across my road. Vanessa lifted her microphone. Mr. Caldwell, this hearing concerns your refusal to comply with community obligations and your continued obstruction of approved infrastructure. I remained standing near the back wall. My property is not in your community. A few heads turned. Vanessa's smile stayed fixed. That claim has been reviewed and rejected. By whom? The board. The absurdity drew a quiet cough from somewhere behind me. Vanessa clicked to the next slide. My house appeared beside a list of alleged violations. Unauthorized fencing, obstruction of emergency access, removal of survey markers, unpaid assessments, and hostile conduct toward association representatives. Hostile conduct meant I had pulled plastic stakes from my own soil. She announced the total balance as $19,680. Then she added that the board had authorized daily penalties until I signed the membership agreement. A murmur moved through the room. I saw neighbors studying me differently now. Not as Ethan, the carpenter who repaired their cabinets and cleared fallen branches after storms, but as the man threatening everyone's new entrance. Vanessa had turned my land into their inconvenience. Then she introduced Peter Sloan, the HOA's attorney. He wore a gray suit that looked too expensive for the folding chair beneath him. He explained that my road had become a public access route through continuous community use. He said delivery trucks, security vehicles, and residents had crossed it for years without objection. That establishes implied dedication, he said. Rachel had warned me they would use those words. I placed one hand inside my jacket, touching the folded copy of my father's exemption, but I did not reveal it. Not yet. Instead, I asked Peter for the traffic records supporting his claim. His eyes moved toward Vanessa. She answered, "Common knowledge does not require records." That was the first crack. Then Linda shifted in her chair. Her hands were trembling around a stack of financial reports. When Vanessa asked her to confirm the unanimous boundary vote, Linda stared at the microphone for several seconds. "I never saw the final map," she whispered. The room went still. Vanessa turned toward her slowly. "We discussed it in executive session." "No," Linda said. "You told us the county had already approved it." Gerald removed his glasses and rubbed both eyes. Vanessa struck the table with her palm. "This hearing is not about internal procedure." But now everyone was listening. I stepped forward and placed the tow notice, the altered map, and the permanent exemption agreement on the table. The county seal caught the projector light. Peter Sloan stopped smiling. Vanessa glanced at the signature, then pushed the document away as if it were dirty. "Outdated," she said. Rachel's voice came from the doorway behind me. "Recorded documents do not expire because your expansion needs a driveway." She entered carrying a black case and a certified county file. Vanessa's face lost its color. Rachel set the file beside my father's agreement. "The association filed a fraudulent access claim on Wednesday," she said. "We requested an injunction this morning." Peter leaned toward Vanessa and whispered urgently. She ignored him. "You cannot intimidate this board," she snapped. Rachel smiled. "We are not here to intimidate you." Outside, thunder rolled across the pines. "We are here to preserve the evidence before the judge sees what you altered." The temporary injunction arrived Monday morning, but Vanessa found another way to tighten the rope. At 8:03, a certified letter hit my mailbox. Pine Ridge's attorney demanded that I remove my fence, surrender keys to the eastern gate, and stop interfering with what they now called an established community access corridor. If I refused, they would seek damages for delaying phase 4 construction. The number at the bottom was $240,000. I read it twice at my kitchen table while rainwater ticked from my boots onto the floor. The refrigerator hummed behind me. My father's exemption lay beneath my hand, solid and real, but the threat still made my stomach tighten. $240,000 could bury a man before he ever reached trial. Rachel called 10 minutes later. "They know their access claim is weak," she said. "So they're trying to make the defense too expensive. Can they win?" Not honestly. That answer bothered me more than a simple no. By noon, Pine Ridge had sent residents an email blaming me for postponed road improvements, rising legal expenses, and possible increases in annual dues. My phone began vibrating every few minutes. Some messages were polite. "Please reconsider. Think about the neighborhood." Others were not. One man accused me of holding 400 families hostage over an unused strip of gravel. Another said people like me enjoyed property values created by others while refusing to contribute. By evening, someone had spray-painted selfish across my eastern gate. The chemical smell struck me before I saw the red letters. Paint ran down the cedar in thick lines, staining the boards my father had cut 30 years earlier. I stood there in the fading light with my fists closed. Vanessa had made the conflict public because public pressure was cheaper than evidence. The next day, a county inspector arrived after receiving an anonymous complaint that my workshop violated commercial zoning. He measured the building, photographed my lumber racks, and asked whether customers visited the property. On Wednesday, the fire department inspected my access road for emergency clearance. Thursday brought an environmental complaint about runoff from my gravel. Every report had the same pattern: detailed language, recent photographs, and just enough truth to force an investigation. None produced a violation, but each one cost me hours away from work. Then my largest client postponed a cabinet installation after hearing that my property might be tied up in litigation. The loss was nearly $12,000. I sat alone in the workshop that night, surrounded by the smell of oak dust and machine oil, listening to the table saw cool with small metallic clicks. For the first time, I understood Vanessa's real weapon. Not the HOA rules. Exhaustion. She wanted to keep filing, accusing, and billing until peace became more valuable than my road. Rachel arrived after dark carrying 2 paper cups and a folder from the county archives. "You can settle," she said quietly. "No shame in protecting yourself." I looked through the open garage door at the ruined gate. Then I remembered Vanessa telling me legal fees would cost more than the property. That sentence had not been a warning. It had been her plan. I took the archive folder from Rachel and opened it beneath the work light. Inside was a property transfer record bearing Vanessa's signature. And beside her name was a company I had never seen before, Whitmore Development Holdings. Whitmore Development Holdings had been formed 18 months earlier, 6 weeks before Pine Ridge announced Phase 4. The registered address belonged to Vanessa's brother-in-law. The company had already purchased 32 acres east of my property, cheap farmland boxed in by woods and a drainage basin. On paper, it looked valuable. In reality, there was no legal road connecting it to the county highway. Except mine. Rachel spread the records across my workbench while the overhead fluorescent tube buzzed above us. Deeds, tax maps, corporate filings. Each page carried the dry smell of old paper and toner, but together they told a simple story. Vanessa had bought land she could not reach. Then she became determined to make my road hers. "She stands to make millions if Phase 4 gets approved," Rachel said. "Without access, those acres are almost useless." I studied the company filing again. Vanessa's name did not appear as the owner. She was listed as an authorized manager, hidden beneath 2 limited liability companies and a family trust. Clever enough to confuse a casual search. Not clever enough to survive discovery. Rachel pulled out a second document. It was the original development agreement between Pine Ridge and the county. Section 14 required any future expansion to use a dedicated public entrance built to county standards. Private roads could not be absorbed through HOA votes, implied membership, or retroactive assessments. My father had highlighted that paragraph in yellow 10 years ago. The ink had faded, but the words had not. "He knew," I said. "He suspected," Rachel replied. "That is why he demanded the permanent exemption." A memory surfaced. My father standing near the eastern fence with Arthur Bell, the original developer, both men arguing beneath a July sun. I had been unloading lumber and ignored most of it. But I remembered Dad pointing toward the road and saying, "You build your neighborhood around me, not through me." At the time, it sounded like stubbornness. Now it sounded like a warning passed forward. We searched deeper. County meeting minutes showed Vanessa had presented Phase 4 as having secured secondary access 3 months before she sent my first notice. A bank loan application valued Whitmore Development Holdings at nearly $4 million, but only if my road became available. Then Rachel found the item that changed everything. An email attached to a planning commission packet had been sent from Vanessa's private account to Peter Sloan. It read, "Once Caldwell is classified as mandatory membership, the road issue resolves itself. Back fees should pressure him into signing before review." The workshop went silent except for rain tapping the metal roof. I read the sentence again. There was no misunderstanding, no boundary confusion, no honest dispute. The fees, the tow truck, the inspections, the public humiliation, every piece had been designed to force my signature. Rachel slid the email into a clear evidence sleeve. "This is motive," she said. "And the altered map may be fraud." I looked toward my father's toolbox, still open beneath the window. The cracked tape measure rested beside his rusted square. For weeks, Vanessa had treated me like an obstacle standing between her and a fortune. She had forgotten that obstacles do not keep records. People do. The next morning, Rachel filed our counterclaim for fraudulent misrepresentation, abuse of process, slander of title, and attempted interference with private property rights. We requested damages, attorney fees, corporate records, board communications, and every financial document connected to Phase 4. At 4:17 that afternoon, Vanessa called me directly. Her voice had lost its sweetness. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said. I looked at the red paint drying on my gate. No, I answered. But my attorney does. Then I hung up. 3 minutes later, a black sedan stopped outside the clubhouse. A process server stepped out carrying a stack of papers thick enough to bend under its own weight. Vanessa had wanted me in court. Now she was going there with me. Discovery did what Vanessa had spent 10 years making sure nobody else could do. It opened the doors. The first batch of records arrived in 6 bankers' boxes carried into Rachel's office by a sweating courier. The cardboard smelled like dust and damp storage. Inside were board minutes, invoices, planning maps, and thousands of printed emails tied together with red string. Vanessa had buried the truth beneath paperwork. Rachel and I spent 3 nights digging it out. Every evening, the office emptied around us until only the copier hummed and traffic hissed across the wet street below. I marked dates with yellow tabs. Rachel built a timeline across one wall. What began as scattered documents slowly became a chain. Vanessa formed Whitmore Development Holdings. Her company bought the inaccessible farmland. She presented Phase 4 to the HOA board without revealing her financial interest. Then she altered the association map, created retroactive fees, and filed the public access claim against my road. Each action pointed toward the same gate. Mine. The board emails were worse than I expected. Gerald had questioned whether the HOA could legally force an independent owner to join. Vanessa replied that resistance would disappear once penalties damaged my credit. Linda asked for county confirmation of the new boundary. Vanessa told her the attorney had already approved it. Peter Sloan had done no such thing. His private emails showed repeated warnings. The exemption is enforceable. The road cannot be acquired through association action. Do not issue retroactive assessments without recorded covenant authority. Vanessa ignored every warning, then ordered him to send the letters anyway. One email carried only 7 words. Make it expensive enough that he signs. Rachel printed that one twice. Our next move was quiet. We subpoenaed the engineer whose name appeared on Vanessa's altered map. He responded within hours. He had surveyed Phase 4, but he had never moved the Pine Ridge boundary. The blue line had been added after his office delivered the original file. He still had the metadata, creation dates, revision history, user accounts. The final alteration had been made from a computer inside the HOA clubhouse at 11:43 p.m., 3 days before the tow truck entered my driveway. The login belonged to Vanessa. That was the payoff Rachel had been waiting for. But we needed more than fraud. We needed to show the court that the board's lawsuit had never been about membership. So I returned to the neighborhood carrying copies of the records Vanessa had used to turn residents against me. I started with Linda. She opened her door wearing slippers and a gray sweater, her face exhausted before I said a word. The smell of chicken soup drifted from the kitchen. I should have stopped her, she whispered. You can still tell the truth. Linda looked toward the street as if Vanessa might be watching from behind every curtain. Then she invited me inside. For 2 hours, she described secret meetings, missing votes, and money transferred from HOA reserves into planning expenses connected to Phase 4. She had questioned the payments. Vanessa threatened to blame the accounting errors on her. Gerald called Rachel the following morning. By Friday, both had signed sworn statements. The neighborhood mood changed almost immediately. Residents who had called me selfish began asking why their dues had funded Vanessa's private development. Someone removed the orange stakes from my property. Another neighbor cleaned the red paint from my gate. Vanessa responded with one final act of confidence. She rejected settlement, demanded a full trial, and filed a motion asking the judge to declare my permanent exemption invalid. Rachel read the motion at my workbench and smiled. What? She just put every false claim in front of the court under her own signature. Outside, wind moved through the pines, carrying the clean smell of approaching snow. I closed my father's toolbox. Vanessa had spent months constructing a legal trap around my property. Now all we had to do was let her walk into it. The courtroom smelled of old wood, wet coats, and the faint metallic heat of radiators working against a January freeze. Vanessa arrived in a navy suit with Peter Sloan beside her and 3 HOA board members trailing behind. She walked past me without looking over, heels striking the marble floor with the confidence of someone who still believed paperwork could replace ownership. Rachel sat beside me at the plaintiff's table. My father's original deed rested inside a clear evidence sleeve between us. When Judge Thomas Reed entered, everyone stood. He was a lean man with silver hair and reading glasses balanced low on his nose. He reviewed the files silently while snow tapped against the tall courthouse windows. Pages turned. A clock clicked above the gallery. Then Peter rose. He argued that my home had become part of Pine Ridge through community integration, implied benefits, and 10 years of continuous association services. He described my private road as essential infrastructure and claimed the HOA had acted to protect hundreds of families. Judge Reed looked over his glasses. "Where is Mr. Caldwell's signed membership agreement?" Peter paused. "There is no traditional agreement, Your Honor." "No traditional agreement," the judge repeated. "Is there an unconventional one?" A few people in the gallery shifted. Peter moved to the altered boundary map. He claimed it reflected the association's modern footprint. Rachel immediately handed the judge the engineer's affidavit, the original digital file, and the metadata showing Vanessa's clubhouse login had created the blue boundary line. Judge Reed compared both maps. "So this line was added by the association president?" Peter cleared his throat. "The circumstances remain disputed. They do not appear especially mysterious." Vanessa leaned toward him and whispered hard enough for me to hear the hiss in her voice. Rachel stood next. She walked the court through the permanent exemption, the county recording number, the development agreement, and Vanessa's financial interest in Whitmore Development Holdings. Then she displayed the email on the courtroom screen. "Make it expensive enough that he signs." The sentence glowed 20 feet wide above Vanessa's head. Nobody moved. Rachel explained the tow order, the retroactive fees, the false access claim, and the inspections triggered after I refused to surrender the road. Linda and Gerald confirmed that no valid board vote had approved the boundary change. Then Vanessa took the stand. She insisted every decision had been made for Pine Ridge. Rachel asked why her private company owned the land behind my property. Vanessa said it was an unrelated investment. Rachel asked why the investment depended on my road. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the witness rail. "Development benefits the entire community." "And you personally?" Peter objected. Judge Reed overruled him. Vanessa stared at Rachel. "I acted within my authority." That was when the judge laughed. Not loudly, just one short, disbelieving breath as he removed his glasses. "Ms. Whitmore, an HOA cannot annex private property by drawing a new line on a map. It cannot invent 10 years of membership, manufacture debt, and use litigation to seize access for a president's private development." He dismissed every claim against me with prejudice. Then he declared the exemption valid, barred Pine Ridge permanently from asserting authority over my land, and ordered the HOA to pay my attorney fees and damages. Finally, he referred the altered filings to the district attorney. Vanessa's face went white. Outside, snow covered the courthouse steps. Rachel handed me the deed. Behind us, reporters surrounded Vanessa. For 10 years, Pine Ridge had never owned my home. Now a judge had made certain it never would. 3 months after the ruling, the orange survey stakes were gone. The red paint had been sanded from my gate, and Pine Ridge had a new president. Vanessa resigned 2 days after the district attorney opened an investigation into the altered map and false county filing. Whitmore Development Holdings collapsed when the bank froze its construction loan. Peter Sloan surrendered the HOA records, cooperated with investigators, and avoided charges, though his firm removed his name from the partnership door before spring. The board mailed every resident a 6-page apology. Mine came with a check. Attorney fees, lost income, property damage, compensation for the fraudulent lien threat and the interference with my business. The amount was enough to replace my gate, resurface the private road, and put something aside for the future. But the money was never the part that stayed with me. What stayed was the sound of Judge Reed's laugh. One short breath of disbelief after months of letters designed to make me feel powerless. Pine Ridge residents voted to cancel Phase 4 and recover the planning money Vanessa had pulled from their reserves. Linda became treasurer again, this time with every transaction visible online. Gerald stepped away from the board entirely. He came to my workshop one afternoon carrying a cedar plank and an apology. "I should have spoken sooner," he said. The sawdust smelled warm beneath the shop lights. "Yes," I told him, "you should have." Then I helped him build a new sign for the neighborhood entrance anyway, not because he deserved to forget what happened, but because justice means fixing what can still be repaired. My own sign came last. I used a slab of white oak my father had stored above the rafters for nearly 20 years. The board was straight, heavy, and scarred by time. I planed it smooth, routed the letters by hand, and sealed the grain against rain. Private road. No HOA authority. Below those words, in smaller letters, I carved the recording number from my father's exemption agreement. I mounted it beside the eastern gate on a cold Saturday morning. The steel post rang beneath my hammer, each strike echoing through the pines. When I finished, sunlight broke across the gravel and caught the fresh black lettering. The road looked exactly as it had before Vanessa decided it was worth stealing. Almost exactly. Now everyone knew who owned it. I still live in the house my father built. I still make cabinets in the workshop. Delivery trucks still ask permission before using the road, and I still grant it when there is a good reason. That was the part Vanessa never understood. Ownership was not about keeping everyone out. It was about having the right to decide. She thought authority came from a title, a clipboard, and enough official-looking paper. She believed ordinary people would surrender if the threats grew expensive enough. She was almost right. I was tired. I was angry. More than once, I considered signing just to make the pressure stop. But my father had left me proof, and Rachel had taught me how patience could turn proof into power. 10 years of silence did not make me a member. A blue line did not make my land theirs. And a courtroom full of confidence could not rescue a lie from a recorded deed. Justice was not loud. It sounded like a judge turning a page, reading the truth, and laughing the people who ignored it straight out of court.